2 Corinthians 12, 1 through 10 has presented several challenges to interpreters. The first challenge is whether or not Paul is speaking of himself as having the heavenly vision, considering the personal pronoun switch from third to first person. A second challenge concerns what Paul means when he says that he has a thorn in the flesh in verse 7. Now, various theories have been floated. Hood, among others, proposes that the thorn is merely a metaphor for Paul's life of cruciformity, that is, his life of suffering for Jesus and the cross. Aiken prefers the medical theory that Paul was suffering from some physical ailment. Another option is that the thorn refers to Paul's human opposition. Others hold that Paul means exactly what he says when he describes his thorn in the flesh as a messenger of Satan, a demon. Now, several Second Temple readings offer insights into these challenges. They allow one to affirm that Paul was having a vision and that the thorn in the flesh likely has a demonic referent. Some of the sources include Philo of Alexandria, the Merkabah mystic tradition, Enoch, and the Ascension of Isaiah. Later Christian sources include the Shepherd of Hermas and Eusebius's ecclesiastical history. Now, regarding heavenly visions and visitations. Philo was a Jew of Alexandrian origin who lived during the 1st century AD, roughly 20 BC to about 45 AD, heavily influenced by Hellenism. Based on many of his writings, Philo practiced a rational mysticism, more about meditation on invisible ideas, that is, true reality, led to an experience with God. He hints that he himself had such experiences in his work Migration 34 through 36, Creation 70 through 71, and Flight 137 through 41. Though there are differences between Philo and Paul, it seems that they may have shared a background in Merkabah mysticism tradition. Regarding this tradition, Price notes that it traces its origins to Rabbi Johanan ben Zakkai, though some works suggest the practice in earlier times. Moray Jones provides a comprehensive look at these sources, highlighting that of Hekalat Rabbati, where one rabbi's visitation to the heavenly realms are recounted. In a follow-up article, Moray Jones focuses on 3 more sources, Song of Songs, Rabbah, Hekalat Zutarti, and Merkabah Rabbah, wherein the story of Rabbi Akiba's ascent to heaven and return is recounted, though he does note that there is some doubt as to the originality of the sources being in the mystical tradition. The idea of an ascension to heaven, either bodily or in visions, was around in Paul's day, and Paul was likely familiar with it, if not a practitioner, though he does argue against such practices in Colossians 2:18, and even hints at such in the passage in question for this paper, comparing it to foolishness. The idea of an ascension or a vision of the heavenly throne room predates the Merkabah tradition. Biblical sources include 1 Kings 22, Isaiah 6, Daniel 7, and Ezekiel 1 and 8 through 11. The biblical data served as the inspiration for later works, such as the Apocalypse of Isaiah. This work is composed of 2 parts, the first describing the circumstances of Isaiah's death, and the second his ascent into heaven as recorded in Isaiah 6. There is some debate over the nature of the second part, whether it is a purely Christian source dating from the 2nd century AD, or if it is a Jewish source dating much earlier with a Christian editor. Himmelfarb holds to this second theory. She goes on to note that the development of the 7 heavens is a later development of the tradition, as some of the earliest material only have 1 heaven. Now, one of the earliest accounts in this set of readings is that of Enoch's ascent to heaven as portrayed in 1 Enoch 14. This writing is part of a larger composition called the Book of Watchers, 1 Enoch 1 through 36, that was based on a number of traditions and was written, assembled, and edited over sometime during the Hellenistic period, sometime during the 4th century BC, possibly through to the turn of the 1st century BC. In the chapter in question, Enoch has a vision where he is carried aloft by winds into heaven, and then into the throne room of God, where the condemnation of the watchers is announced. There is only 1 heaven in this account. Enoch also presents a note of comparison to this passage regarding the switch from third person to first person in telling the account. See 1 Enoch 1:2 compared to 2 Corinthians 12, 1 through 13. Now, as to the thorn in the flesh. Having established that there are sources that show that the idea of a heavenly visitation is not outside the realm of Paul's knowledge, the other point of contention in 2 Corinthians 12 is how to understand what he means when he writes of having a thorn in the flesh. Several theories have been mentioned above. The idea, though, that Paul is actually referring to an actual spiritual being bears some merit based upon various background readings, which show that there is often a cost or punishment of some sort associated with having heavenly visions. Price notes the works of Shloem describing the Merkabah visions wherein the traveler is beset by angels on his way to heaven, and in the case of Rabbi Akiba is attacked as he approaches the curtain around the throne room. Murray Jones notes a similarity to the Akiba story as well. Price also notes several Christian sources that attest to this idea. First, he discusses two incidents from the Shepherd of Hermas. This work is a Christian source, probably from Rome, dating anywhere from AD 70 to AD 150, that some early sources considered to be canonical. In Visions Book 4, in a vision, Hermas is attacked by a monster. In the sixth parable, an angel is beating Christians and throwing them into the thorns. In the seventh parable, Hermas asks for the removal of the angel that was causing him distress. Eusebius, a Christian bishop who lived during the late 3rd and early 4th century AD, wrote a history of the Christian church, his ecclesiastical history. Writing well after Paul, the understanding that supernatural beings can afflict people, even believers, for a purpose is still alive. In Book 5, Chapter 28, Eusebius tells the story of Natalius, a confessor who allowed himself to be made bishop by a heretical sect. Upon assuming the role, God repeatedly sent visions to Natalius, warning him to repent. Failing to respond to the visions, he was scourged by holy angels and punished severely through the entire night, a process that left physical marks on him. In conclusion, the issues brought up in studying 2 Corinthians 12, 1-10 have led to numerous and different explanations of the text. Background readings for this passage can help focus in on the most probable explanations. Regarding the reality of the heavenly vision, whether in body or in spirit, there are a number of sources that show that such a concept was not unheard of and with which Paul was probably familiar. First Enoch, the Ascension of Isaiah, the Hekhalot, and Merkabah traditions attest to this concept. Regarding the interpretation of the thorn in the flesh as being exactly what Paul described it as, a messenger of Satan, the background readings show that this too was not a strange concept, especially after having experienced a vision and to teach a lesson. In Paul's case, that lesson was to keep Paul humbly trusting in God. The story of Rabbah Akiba in the Hekhalot literature and the post-apostolic works attest to the idea of being afflicted by supernatural beings. These background readings provide the context that helps in understanding what Paul and his readers may have meant and understood in writing and reading this passage.